Why France destroyed Gaddafi, France's ulterior motive.
He swept to power in 2007, promising a new style of leadership, but left office amid allegations that his presidential campaign had received illegal funds from Libya.
Hello there, and welcome to our channel. Let us talk about the fall of a great African leader, Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi, a renowned Libyan leader, was a visionary and had a strong belief in uniting Africans.
United States of Africa, one in which he would be president. A continent with one army, one passport, one currency, called the Afro.
He believed a united Africa would speak with one voice at international forums, such as the United Nations, and manage to bargain and be seen as an equal partner. Because of his longing for the United States of Africa, which he pushed for many years, hoping one day to have a unified African government, he was seen as an enemy of Western countries. Gaddafi believed this was the only way that Africa could develop without Western interference. Till now, there is still a debate in the media and investigations ongoing on who masterminded the fall of this great terrorist. To find out the mystery behind his demise, do not forget to click the subscribe button to get more updates from our channel. Also, hit the notifications bell so you'll be notified every time we upload a new video. Without further ado, let's get straight into the video. The reason why France killed Gaddafi is still questionable to date. In 1965, after being commissioned into the Libyan army, he started building the basis for the overthrow of King Idris, whom he saw as a tool of the countries of Western Europe. Within 4 years, Gaddafi had taken charge of the army, and on September 1, 1969, he successfully staged a coup to gain control of the government. Gaddafi proclaimed himself commander-in-chief of Libya's armed forces and its government with the rank of colonel, and took over as chairman of the ruling Revolutionary Council. Gaddafi quickly started carrying out his long-dreamed-of ambitions for Libya, nationalizing all international banks and oil corporations, and demanding all European military outposts in Libya be shut down. Italian and Jewish citizens of Libya were expelled from their homes in 1970 after Gaddafi took their personal property. Gaddafi has been actively supporting a wide range of terrorist organizations and governments since he came to power, including Iran, Iraq, Syria, Uganda, the Palestine Liberation Organization and its affiliates, and the Irish Republican Army. He engaged in a disastrous fight for control of the country's northern regions against Chad and its ally France, while receiving strong support from the Soviet Union. He also engaged in a fruitless war against Egypt. Gaddafi sent an invading force into Chad in an effort to expel French forces from the nation, only to have it destroyed by the under-equipped, under-trained, but fiercely driven Chadian army. Large numbers of cars, pieces of equipment, and weapons were left behind when the survivors escaped back to Libya. He sparked several conflicts with the US, one of which resulted in a bombing raid on his headquarters in Tripoli by the US in retaliation on April 15, 1986.
Throughout the night, the U.S. pounded Libya. The strikes began with more than 110 Tomahawk missiles launched mostly from U.S. ships and submarines.
Although Gaddafi only suffered minor wounds, his young daughter died. Over 200 people were killed when a bomb detonated on Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, in 1988 by Libyan intelligence agents. As a devout follower of Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, he even acquired the same military rank, rising from captain to colonel after the takeover. Gaddafi first focused on eradicating the unfair economic effects of foreign hegemony. The Suez Canal was that for Nasser. Oil was important to Gaddafi. Significant deposits were found in Libya in the late 1950s, but extraction was under the hands of foreign oil companies, which regulated pricing to favor their local users and reaped a half share of the profits. When the oil companies refused, Gaddafi threatened to halt production and requested revision of the contracts. In a memorable provocation, he told foreign oil executives that people who have lived without oil for 5,000 years can live without it again for a few years to obtain their legitimate rights. The scheme was successful, and Libya became the first developing nation to obtain a large portion of the proceeds from its oil production. Other countries quickly followed this example, and the Arab petroboom of the 1970s got underway. Libya was in a great position to profit from this. Black gold made it affluent rapidly because it had production levels that were comparable to those of the Gulf states and one of Africa's smallest populations, less than 3 million at the time. He developed what he called the Third Universal Theory, which was described in his well-known Green Book, in an effort to establish himself as a preeminent political philosopher in the beginning of the 1970s. The theory contends that through resolving the tensions between capitalism and communism, the first and second theories, it will lead to a global political, economic, and social revolution and the liberation of all oppressed peoples. In actuality, it amounts to little more than a collection of pointless rants, and it is brutally ironic that a text whose stated goal is to remove the constraints imposed by the powerful interests that dominate political institutions was used to oppress a whole nation. The end outcome of Gaddafi's theory, which was emphasized by his utter intolerance of any form of opposition or alternative viewpoint, was the hollowing out of Libyan society, with all traces of civil society, constitutionality, and genuine political involvement eliminated. The book argues that the development of people's committees to oversee all facets of existence is the answer to society's problems rather than electoral representation, which Gaddafi referred to as dictatorship by the greatest party or any other existing political system. This new system is illustrated diagrammatically in the Green Book as a sophisticated wagon wheel, with fundamental popular congresses around the rim electing people's committees that send influence along the spokes to a receptive and genuinely democratic People's General Secretariat at the center. The actual model that was developed was a highly hierarchical one. He also killed dozens of Libyan exiles murdered by assassins who were thought to be part of a global Libyan intelligence network. Governments were willing to overlook Gaddafi's abuse of human rights in Libya and his pursuit of dissidents abroad, but it was a different story when he backed organizations that employed terrorism on their own turf. An important turning point was the 1986 bombing of a Berlin nightclub frequented by US soldiers that was attributed to Libyan agents. While there was no concrete evidence beyond intelligence chatter that Libya had ordered the attack, US President Ronald Reagan ordered airstrikes against Tripoli and Benghazi in revenge for the two servicemen.
At 7 o'clock this evening, Eastern Time, air and naval forces of the United States launched a series of strikes against the headquarters, terrorist facilities, and military assets that support Muammar Gaddafi's subversive activities.
One civilian and the scores of wounded. Although there was significant damage and an undetermined number of Libyan deaths, including, it was said, Gaddafi's adopted daughter, the colonel escaped unharmed from the US response that was supposed to kill the mad dog of the Middle East, as Mr. Reagan dubbed him. Perhaps among critics of Washington's overbearing foreign policy, his reputation may even have improved. The next major uptick occurred in 1988 with the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over the Scottish town of Lockerbie, which resulted in 270 deaths, both on the ground and in the air, making it the deadliest terrorist attack the UK had ever seen. Due to Gaddafi's initial unwillingness to turn over the two Libyan suspects to Scottish jurisdiction, there was a lengthy period of discussions and UN sanctions before their surrender and trial in 1999. While the other man was found not guilty, one of the men, Abdelbasset Ali al-Megrati, was sentenced to life in prison. Long-term exiles were informed that they might return without being persecuted or imprisoned, and there was even a little Tripoli Spring. In keeping with his legend of being the brother leader of the revolution who had long since ceded power to the people, Gaddafi committed to protesting alongside the people when the first demands for a Libyan Day of Wrath were made. As it turned out, a portion of the Libyan population, particularly in the east, could not resist the lure of freedom and the possibility of overthrowing the colonel, just as Mubarak in Egypt and Ben Ali in Tunisia had been overthrown. Some of the earliest footage of the Benghazi uprising showed angry young Libyans destroying a green statue outside an office building that symbolized the fictitious liberation theory that had kept them in captivity since the 1970s, the Green Book. As the revolt grew and the seriousness of the threat to his power became clear, Gaddafi demonstrated that he had not lost any of the cruelty used against exiles and dissidents in the 70s and 80s. This time, entire towns and communities that had ventured to deface his posters and demand his impeachment were the targets. The ragtag rebel force, which was made up of untrained militias and military deserters joined together under the National Transitional Council's name, was nearly overpowered by regular forces and mercenaries, NTC. They were dismissed by the colonel as misbehaving 17-year-olds who had been given pills at night, hallucinogenic drugs in their drinks, their milk, their coffee, and their Nescafé. The UN resolution mandating the protection of civilians allowed NATO to intervene on the side of the rebels in March, preventing their seeming impending obliteration. However, it took them months to take advantage of the situation. Gaddafi attempted to strengthen his ties with the West following the terrorist strikes on the US on September 11, 2001. His government gained concessions from the West in exchange for his assistance in locating Islamic extremists, including the relaxation of the sanctions put in place against it as a result of his terrorism in the 1980s. When demonstrations against Muammar Gaddafi's authority began, Gaddafi's government erupted in Libya in 2011 as part of the Arab Spring. A civil war broke out between Gaddafi's forces and the rebels, who were composed of students, regular citizens, and army defectors, and received air and logistical help from NATO. Gaddafi started a harsh and oppressive campaign against his people. The government's security forces reacted by opening fire on the demonstrators. Gaddafi promised to hunt down the cockroaches and rats who had risen in arms against him, inch by inch, room by room, home by home, alleyway by alleyway, person by person, as the initially non-violent protest movement against his 42-year dictatorship turned into a full-fledged armed insurrection. Beginning with the indiscriminate shelling of residential areas by pro-Gaddafi forces, thousands of demonstrators and others were detained, many of whom were being held in secret detention, and summary murders were carried out. However, following a military intervention by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and 8 months of intense fighting, Muammar Gaddafi and his inner circle were surrounded and alone in Sirte, the coastal city where he was born. They had to hide among abandoned homes to avoid the ferocious and indiscriminate shelling by anti-Gaddafi militias from Misrata, Benghazi, and other places that had surrounded the area. On the morning of October 20, 2011, Mu'tasim Gaddafi, the son of Muammar Gaddafi, who had been in charge of leading the defense of Sirte, gave the order to leave the besieged District 2 of Sirte in a convoy of about 50 heavily armed vehicles, along with members of his inner circle and his remaining supporters. The attempt to flee was unsuccessful because Gaddafi's convoy was highly armed. This story provides proof that Misrata-based militias tortured the Gaddafi convoy members to savage beatings before murdering scores of them, presumably after capturing and disarming them, and placing them under their complete authority. Even 7 months later, the perpetrators of these crimes remain uninvestigated and unpunished by the Libyan government. According to survivors whom the Human Rights Watch spoke to, one of Muammar Gaddafi's bodyguards threw a hand grenade at them when militia fighters discovered Muammar Gaddafi and his inner circle hiding next to the drainage pipes. The grenade bounced off the concrete wall and exploded in the middle of the leadership circle, killing Gaddafi's defense minister, Abu Bakr Yunus, and injuring Muammar Gaddafi fighters from Misrata attacked Muammar Gaddafi right away, bayoneted him in the buttocks, and then pummeled him with kicks and strikes. It is unknown if Muammar Gaddafi passed away as a result of this brutality, the shrapnel, or anything else by the time he was placed into an ambulance and driven to Misrata. Mu'tasim Gaddafi, who was head of the military defense of Sirte and had led the fateful convoy, was captured by Misrata militia fighters in a separate incident that morning, October 20. Mu'tasim was attempting to depart the scene of the fighting when he was captured. Mu'tasim can be seen in video footage recorded immediately after his capture, conscious and able to walk, but with minor shrapnel wounds to his upper chest. He can be seen speaking, sipping water, and smoking cigarettes in a room with Lions of the Valley militiamen from Misrata in video footage recorded later on October 20. He was dead by the afternoon of the same day and had recently sustained serious wounds, which is evidence that he was murdered while being held. Over 100 members of the convoy were already dead when the final combat came to an end. The majority of the victims were killed during combat and NATO airstrikes on the convoy, although at least some were reportedly shot dead after anti-Gaddafi militias combing the area after the fighting discovered them alive and arrested them. Anti-Gaddafi forces captured alive an estimated 150 persons after the battle. They transported at least 53, and maybe as many as 66 of these survivors were discovered dead the next day at the adjacent Mahari Hotel. Misrata was where they were being held in prison after transporting about 70 of these survivors there. At the scene of their capture, 29 of the imprisoned people can be seen in amateur video footage shot by a fighter from Misrata being assaulted, slapped, taunted, and spat upon by their captors. Human Rights Watch recognized 6 of the 29 individuals in the film as being among the victims eventually discovered on the Mahari Hotel grounds, while medical officials in Sirte verified a match for an additional 7 males shown in the video and those discovered at the hotel. 5 other bodies at the motel were recognized by relatives and friends. According to NATO's official version of events that led to Gaddafi's killing, and RAF aircraft spotted a convoy leaving the dictator's hometown Sirte in October 2011. Officially unaware of who was traveling in that convoy, NATO planes bombed it anyway, and Gaddafi was found by rebel fighters hiding in a nearby drainpipe. He was killed, apparently by his captors, as he was being taken away. Despite the presence of Turkish and British SAS special forces in the area, according to El Abidi, the operation to target and kill Gaddafi was exclusively French. French intelligence had a direct role in the death of Gaddafi, including his killing, he claimed. However, the claims brought up against France were: firstly, Syria provided Paris Gaddafi's satellite phone number in exchange for leniency, according to French defense analyst and former intelligence officer Eric Danica, add up. Danica told France 24 that the charges were a farce, utter nonsense, noting that France's posture towards Syria hardened in November 2011 as Paris became the first nation to recognize the rebel Syrian National Council. Assad would not have sold Gaddafi's phone number in such a way, claimed the former intelligence officer who is now the chairman of the French Center for Intelligence Research. France did not need Syria's help to trace Gaddafi. Secondly, who would believe the accusations of Gaddafi supporting Sarkozy's campaign will be a reason to command his murder. As Gaddafi's authority crumbled in the wake of the Arab Spring, it appears that Sarkozy, who controlled France from 2007 to 2012, dispatched Secret Service officers to infiltrate neighborhood gangs that were looking for Gaddafi. This is because Gaddafi donated 50 million euros, $67 million, to his presidential campaign. As a result, it is now considered one of the largest political scandals in French history. Sarkozy's political career was marred by these accusations. These accusations put a stop to his third presidential endeavor. According to reports, Sarkozy is being looked into in connection with 2 further corruption cases. France forbids the use of outside finance for political campaigns. He has vehemently refuted various accusations made against him throughout the years. I hope this was educational enough. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments section below. To watch more educated videos like this one, do not forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. Also, share with your friends. We'll see you in our next video.